It's Thursday, January 29th, 2026. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Grant Herms. Today on the show, the fight over DHS and ICE just might be the Democrats' last stand, as the threat of another government shutdown is heading our way in a little over a day as I'm recording. And while I want to talk about that because that's going to hit you right in your bank account, we have to start with the latest with DHS and ICE, not just in Minnesota, but around the country, because while the administration isn't changing direction, it's trying to soften its tone. In some cases, literally. We'll get into it. But first, make sure you're following or subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to the Make It Make Sense Substack, where I know I said I was going to have a piece out today about Olympians and national security experts reacting to the news that ICE agents will be at the Olympics for the U.S., but I'm waiting on a fact check, and I didn't want to run this story before I got it. I'd rather have you get the story a day late than get bad info. But hopefully, that will be up for paid subscribers tonight. You can subscribe for just $5 a month. All right, when we come back, ICE retreats from several states as the fight in Congress heats up for Democrats. Does coffee make you anxious, sweaty, unfocused, or maybe your doctor thinks you have a crippling caffeine addiction, which I am definitely not in any way referencing for my personal life? Let me turn you on to Matcha. Matcha is ceremonial-grade matcha from a private hillside in Uji, Japan. Smooth, naturally sweet, and it gives you this calm, focused energy without the jitters. It's packed with antioxidants like more than 130 times more than regular green tea, so you feel energized and you feel good. Now, the matcha flavor isn't for everybody, but good news, matcha has 6 infused flavors like banana cacao, strawberry lemon, cinnamon goji berry, and rosehip dragon fruit, which sounds like a name from Game of Thrones, but it's delicious. Plus, every box you buy helps provide a meal to a child through the No Kid Hungry program, which we love. Now, right now, listeners, to make it make sense, can go to mantramatcha.com and use the code MIMS25 for 15% off. Now, that code also supports Make It Make Sense with a commission. That's how these things work. I got to legally tell you. But the good news is you'll help the show, you'll stay caffeinated, and maybe not too much. Again, that code at mantramatcha.com is MIMS25 for 15% off. Mantra Matcha, less chaos, more clarity, 2 things we could all use a little bit of right now. All right, let's get on with the show. Right now, the fight over whether we're going to get another government shutdown is happening in the Senate, and I promise I am going to talk about it, but before I do, a lot has happened with ICE and DHS in just the last 2 days. On Tuesday, I talked about how the head of the ICE operations around the country, Greg Bovino, has been reassigned back to his old job at a Border Patrol outpost in California where he's expected to retire. The guy replacing him as the face of ICE operations is Tom Homan, Trump's border czar, no softy on immigration, and the same guy who said this in the fall of 2024.
We have seen one estimate that says it would cost $88 billion to deport 1 million people a year.
I don't know if that's accurate or not.
Is that what American taxpayers should expect?
What price do you put on national security? Is that worth it?
Is there a way to carry out mass deportation without separating families?
Of course there is. Families can be deported together.
Homan includes U.S. citizens in that too, by the way. That's what he means when he says deporting families together. But since setting foot in the North Star State, Homan has struck a much more subdued tone. Literally, he held a press conference today where he basically whispered.
That said, I'm not here because the federal government has carried this mission out perfectly. First thing I said to senior staff when I walked in here is what I told you earlier. I didn't come here looking for photo ops or headlines. I come here looking for solutions. I do not want to hear that everything's been done here has been perfect. Nothing's ever perfect. Anything can be improved on. And what we've been working on is making this operation safer, more efficient, by the book.
I have the volume all the way up there, and it's still hard to hear him. But that thing about not being perfect, while a massive understatement, is really a dig at Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, Bovino, and Deputy Chief of Staff of the White House, Stephen Miller, because it was revealed by Axios this week that it was Miller who's been pushing the narrative that Alex Preddy, who was shot and killed by DHS agents over the weekend, was attempting to massacre law enforcement, and Miller has become the only person effectively running the White House immigration strategy. Trump has basically been cut out of this to deal with his daydreams about expanding U.S. territory to Greenland or Mexico, his ballroom, and the First Lady's new documentary that premieres tonight, where she was paid $40 million to give access to Amazon, which, to some people, and in some places, they might call that a bribe to keep Amazon in Trump's good graces. But I digress. But what's happening at DHS is this knives-out fight between the overtly extreme Miller, Bovino, and Noem wing to the more quietly extreme that includes Homan and ICE Director Todd Lyons. Now, when it comes to Lyons, he was supposed to appear in court tomorrow to explain why his agency had been ignoring court orders to release a detainee named Juan, for whom ICE did not have an explanation for why they were keeping him locked up, and the agency had been ignoring requests and orders from courts to give those explanations. Instead, Lyons will not have to be in court because after the court demanded that he show his face or risk being arrested, they just let Juan out, like it never happened. And while that saved Lyons a trip to Minneapolis in January, the judge said in his new court order that he found at least 96 other court orders that ICE had violated across 74 cases, saying, quote, ICE has likely violated more court orders in January 2026 than some federal agencies have violated in their entire existence. To be very clear, this judge is the chief federal judge for the state of Minnesota, who is a staunch Republican and clerked for the late Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, who basically wrote the book on how conservatives view the law. This is a serious dude who is also roundly respected and who is also at the end of his patience with these people. We also got the news that inside the Department of Justice, there's been a potential staff revolt as prosecutors inside the attorney's office there confronted the Trump-appointed U.S. Attorney Daniel Rosen and an aide to the Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche over concerns that they were being asked to execute orders that went against the department's mission and best practices, according to 4 people who were briefed on the exchange who talked to the New York Times this week. Now, Rosen didn't sign up for this. He left a lucrative career in commercial litigation as a real estate attorney, never a prosecutor, to become the U.S. Attorney for Minnesota. So he doesn't have to have the normal qualifications for the job in an office that's been hollowed out by the actual resignations of lifelong prosecutors. But because of things like that, we got the news today as well that ICE agents, according to Reuters, that said they were no longer supposed to interact with protesters whom the agency is calling agitators, and that same memo also said that people ICE was going after had to be targeted and have a, quote, criminal nexus, meaning a criminal reason to be stopped by ICE instead of random, illegal, show-me-your-papers checks. That new directive is actually an admission that despite the lies being told by Kristi Noem and Greg Bovino and J.D. Vance and the president, ICE wasn't conducting targeted arrests in Minneapolis, because if they were, this new direction wouldn't be needed. It means that what we're seeing from DHS in Minnesota is a full retreat, and it's happening in other places too. ICE was recently sent into the town of Lewiston, Maine just last week, which, like Minneapolis, also has a large Somali population. And after just 5 days and 200 arrests, ICE is leaving. That decision apparently came after Republican Senator Susan Collins, who was up for re-election, talked to Kristi Noem, implying that ICE's presence in her state would hurt her chances of Republicans keeping her seat in the Senate, which really makes it feel like ICE's deployment to certain places is dependent on politics, not crime. ICE is also backing down on a plan to build a acres-large detention center in Oklahoma City after people there came out in droves to oppose the plan. Now, I know Oklahoma City is a blue dot in a red state, but it's also still Oklahoma, normally the first state called for Republicans in an election. Like the polls close at 8 and at 8:01 and 1 second, it's red on the map. If DHS's plans there are failing, they've got real problems on their hands. And so does Kristi Noem, whom members of the Senate and the House are calling for her to resign or face an impeachment investigation. And while at first Trump was sort of wishy-washy about his stance on her, the pair had a 2-hour-long meeting earlier this week and seemed to have patched things up. But we'll see what happens. Trump tends to be a little back and forth when it comes to who he's going to support and who he's not. Now, speaking of the House and the Senate, it's a good time to get to what's happening in those places and what the future of DHS might be. Friday night at midnight marks the end of the government funding deal that was agreed to back in November to end the longest shutdown in history. This fight in January was expected a few weeks ago to be over the Affordable Care Act subsidy extensions again, but last month the House passed an extension to those, and it was up to the Senate to pass it. But the president has said he will likely veto any extension, so that's kind of dead in the water right now. I also want to say that what won't be part of this fight is SNAP benefits or food stamps to feed children, the elderly, and the poor. Those were extended until September, just in time for the midterm elections. What this fight has become about now in the Senate is how the Senate and how Congress are going to rein in DHS and ICE. Today, 55 senators, which includes 6 Republicans and the leader of the Republicans, John Thune, voted against the spending package that would give DHS almost $65 billion to continue operating as is. Here's what Democrats are asking for. Body cameras have to be worn by as many ICE agents as possible, which will be hard because ICE eliminated 19 of 22 positions of the people in charge of buying body cams, despite an agency directive that all agents wear them where they're available. Agents will no longer be allowed to wear masks and will have to identify themselves. Agents will not be able to conduct roving patrols. And the rules for ICE warrants, which are not the same thing as judicial warrants that come from a judge, will be much more strict. They've also agreed to extend DHS funding at its current levels for right now, for an unspecified amount of time, at least for right now, while they pass everything else, and then give themselves some breathing room to overhaul DHS and ICE. That overhaul could end up being abolishing ICE and rebuilding it from the ground up. Among those calling for that is senior Massachusetts Senator Ed Markey.
Right now, Democrats have the power to defund and abolish ICE. We should do it. This is about right and wrong. And the murder we are seeing on the streets is just plain wrong. Anyone who supports funding DHS and ICE is supporting the murder of Americans. We can stop this. Not one penny more for the Department of Homeland Security.
For starters, Markey has been in the Senate for a long time. He is a very senior member. He's also not super liberal by current standards, and he's also running for re-election. But he has a point. A poll done by YouGov just a few days ago found that more Americans now support abolishing ICE than don't. 46%, almost half of Americans, said ICE should be dismantled compared to 41% who said it should stay. And ICE is getting more and more unpopular, even among that 41%. 57% said they disapproved of ICE, and 58% said that ICE's tactics were too forceful. Those are huge numbers of people to agree on something, and it's big news for the White House because those people are lining up on the opposite side as them. Now, the call for abolishing ICE aside, Democrats have promised to trigger another shutdown if what they're asking for doesn't get done. They even tanked a back-channel meeting earlier this week with the president, and at least a handful of Republicans seem willing to join them in doing that right now. So, what happens if a deal is reached? Well, it'll be a change to what the House passed, meaning it has to go back to the House, where Democrats there have said they have asks of their own. Here's House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries.
Would you like the ban on deportation of American citizens as part of this?
I think that, in what country are we living in if it's controversial to prohibit a ban on American citizens? That shouldn't even be a discussion.
Is that a yes? You want
Of course
that?
it's a yes.
Okay.
In what country are we living in where ICE and DHS have free reign to detain and deport American citizens? That's inconsistent with the Constitution. And so, if the extremists don't get it, it should be made explicit.
I mean, he has a point about the basic idea of not supporting U.S. citizens to countries they're not citizens of, but the tricky part here is that the House is expected to be out of session next week for no good reason. It's just what the Speaker of the House likes to do, to try and jam through unpopular bills and then shirk the duties of Congress, which is to, debate laws thoughtfully. But Speaker Mike Johnson doesn't really see it that way. At least he hasn't since becoming Speaker. He says the House, in these situations, has done its job. And now it's the Senate's turn, so he's just going to call it quits. He's like the kid in class who tries to stop the game in the middle of it because they're winning, even though recess isn't over yet. So the Senate is up against the clock here. Now, At the very beginning of this episode, I said Minnesota, ICE, DHS, all of it, was maybe a last stand for the Democrats. What I mean by that is Democrats have not been popular for a long time. The same YouGov poll about ICE shows that among all voters, Democrats are at a negative 33% approval rating, and among Democrats, their approval is only 30%. That's their own people. When you ask Democrats about their approval of Democrats in Congress specifically, 30% say they still support them. The only thing congressional Democrats have going for them is that among their own voters, Hakeem Jeffries is the most liked leader with a 53% approval, but a negative 34% among independent voters and a negative 26% among all voters. Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader in the Senate, remains undefeated as one of the least liked leaders in modern history with a negative 41% approval from all voters, the lowest among all four leaders in Congress right now. He's got a negative 50% from independents and a minus 15% among his own voters. In the last two showdowns that we had, Democrats were heavily criticized for caving to the whims of the White House. And they've been heavily criticized as being not any good as a minority party, which when a party is fully out of power in the legislature and the Oval Office, like the Democrats are, there's only one real tool you have to slow things down. And it's to be an overall pain in the ass to the majority, kind of like killing a penalty in hockey. Play keep away, be annoying, run out the clock. But that takes conviction, which Democrats have yet to show their voters that they have in large amounts. And now this fight can be seen, I think, as an almost Alamo last stand, not just because of the civil rights and constitutional risks that happen on the other side of that wall by allowing ICE and DHS to continue the way that they've been operating, but because they risk Democratic voters throwing their hands up and walking away from the party just ahead of the midterms. And maybe the Alamo then isn't the right analogy because the Alamo was a defeat. Sorry, Texas, you're idolizing losers. I said it. Come at me in the comments. Maybe what it's more like is the Battle of the Bulge in World War II, where war-weary, undersupplied Allied forces held back the Nazis and forced them to retreat, marking the beginning of the end of the war in Europe. And while there's a very real reason to rein in ICE and DHS, given what we've seen with our own eyes and what federal judges across the country have been telling us for months now, Democrats have their own reasons for putting up this fight. And I think the question here is, will they find that they have the political stomach to do that, or will they leave the American people to continue to fend for themselves like we saw in Minnesota? All right, that's it for today's episode. Please rate and review the show wherever you get your podcast. Comment, hit the subscribe button if you're a watcher on YouTube. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack, where paid subscribers will be getting, hopefully, that brand new story about ICE at the Olympics, where I'm getting reactions from former Team USA members and national security experts. It's just $5 a month to get access to that and a whole bunch of other weekly reporting that you definitely do not want to miss out. And as always, share the show on social media. It's Mims News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word on every platform. I am at Grant Herms on Twitter and Blue Sky, and at Grant Herms TV on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Herms, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.